Emergencies Act will be used to strengthen and support law enforcement agencies at all levels across the country.
Canada's truckers' protests against vaccine mandates and COVID-19 restrictions have reached to a point that the government had to invoke the Emergency Act. This is a very rare move in Canada. But why is Canada, a country that has achieved more than 90% of vaccination among adults, facing such massive protests? What do these emergency powers mean? What are Indians saying about it, and how these protests are spreading across the world? These protests by the Freedom Convoy started in January. Thousands of truckers reached Parliament Hill in Ottawa to protest against COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Some abused the Prime Minister and even vandalized the property, used Nazi symbols, and many just registered their protests. These protests until now have been largely peaceful. These truckers are protesting against government's decision to make COVID-19 vaccine mandatory for the truckers who are crossing US-Canada border. In just a few days, the protest that has started against some vaccine mandates transformed into protests against COVID-19 restrictions and Trudeau government. These protests are largely happening in the capital city of Ottawa, and it has reportedly already cost $14 million to the administration. Similar protests are happening in other provinces as well. But the biggest concern is the blockade of Ambassador Bridge that connects Canada with its neighbor, the USA. This is one of the busiest border crossing in the country, and it has now been opened after the blockade of 6 days. In just 6 days of blockade, goods worth billions of dollars could not cross the bridge, and it resulted in loss of hundreds of millions of dollars to the administration. After all this, Trudeau government was under tremendous pressure, and it did something that surprised a lot of people. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked Emergency Act for the first time in Canadian history. Under this act, the government gets extraordinary powers, like banning the assembly of people and use of certain services. This is being debated by the Canadian Parliament right now, but it has already stirred up massive controversy. This topic was widely discussed by Indians on Twitter, where netizens reminded Trudeau of his statement on farmers' protests last year when farmers were blocking the highway. Although those protests were happening for a completely different reason. These protests that started in Canada has already reached many other countries. The US, which regularly sees anti-vaccine protests, is witnessing similar demonstrations. Inspired by Canadian protests, thousands protested in Paris, whereas New Zealand too witnessed similar protests. Canada has achieved nearly 90% vaccination among adults, but despite that, these protests have surprised many. Are these protesters being misled? Are they being guided by misinformation? Or are their demands against vaccine mandates and mask mandates legitimate and valid? What do you think about this? Let me know in the comment section. And if you like this video, do not forget to drop in a like and subscribe to India Times.